Record. Hi, everybody. This is Ben Marchman with NatureLink, and I want to welcome you to the FireKeepers Global Conference, in which we'll gather for powerful conversations with cutting-edge experts and thought leaders who will guide you to connect to your truest self and activate your natural gifts. This event is designed to reinstate the importance of carrying our soul-directed vision back into our community, so that ourselves and our communities will flourish. Here you're invited to learn how to seek the guidance of your inner voice so that you can truly understand what it means to live life with purpose. I'm here today with Dr. Mehl-Madrona. Lewis is an executive director of the Coyote Institute for Studies of Change and Transformation in Orono, Maine, and is also an associate professor of family medicine at the University of New England College of Medicine. His recent book with Barbara Mainguy is Remapping the Mind, and he has a pretty extensive bio, but we're going to let him expound on that in a little bit. And his topic today is Indigenous Perspectives on Mind and Mental Health in Community. So welcome today, Lewis. I'm excited to talk.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
And instead of diving into the questions right away, I didn't know if you wanted to present something to the listeners, a little bit more on your bio.
Sure. Well, I come from Lakota heritage on my father's side. His name was Frank, and he came from the Pine Ridge Reservation, and Cherokee on my mother's side from the Southeast. I grew up in southeastern Kentucky. My parents met compliments of the USO during the Korean War. And they met at a dance, and apparently they did more than dance, because here I am. So I grew up in a kind of, you might say, non-conscious, non-aware that it was an indigenous context until I got to university. I was primarily raised by my grandparents, my Cherokee, my grandfather, whom I wasn't related to biologically, but was very much immersed in the culture. Though I didn't know it growing up, I just thought we were normal. It took going to university to find out we were not normal. I mean, from mainstream American perspective. And then I think the shock of my life came when I got to medical school, which was at Stanford. And I found out we were definitely not normal for Stanford. So in Coyote Medicine, one of the books that I wrote, I describe being in pharmacology class, and the professor looks at us and says, life is a relentless progression toward death, disease, and decay. The physician's job is to slow the rate of decline. And it just freaked me out, because my great-grandmother had always said, you should die healthy so you can party on the other side. And she had no belief whatsoever that illness and death were linked. For her, illness was suffering that you might have to undergo, and death was when your time was up, and you could be totally healthy and die, and you could be sick and not die. And when you think about it, from a macroscopic perspective, that's pretty true. If you're observing from the outside and you're not using the sophisticated imaging that we have now, that was probably a good observation on her part. But at the time, I was a little shaken. So I ran over to the Stanford Indian Center, and I burst into the room, and there was Henrietta Blue Eyes at the desk. And I ran up to her, and she had one of those ancient artifacts called a Rolodex. You might have seen one in a museum. And so she said, what tribe? And I said, Cherokee. So she found me two elders to visit, and that got me through medical school. So when we talk about community, I I certainly had that experience of needing community to be, being in a strange place that was culturally unfamiliar to me, and needing to find community in order to cope with it, in order to engage with it. And I remember at Stanford, we had this corner of the room where the misfits hung out, in the student lounge. And um, we had a mentor, and uh, he's still someone that I value greatly. He's now chair of neuroscience at Rutgers. His name is Wise Young, and he mentored us through medical school because Wise was wise to the ways of Stanford and places like Stanford. He had grown up in Taiwan, and of a mainland Chinese father and I think a Japanese mother. And he was used to cross-cultural communication. And so Wise explained to the rest of us how things worked, and helped us not get into trouble. And it was funny on our way here. So we took an Uber from Newark. We stayed the night last night at the Newark airport. We took an Uber to Manhattan, where we are right in this moment. And our driver was from Brazil. And we found out that most of his work is done in his Brazilian community near the Newark airport. And his wife is a photographer. And most of her work is done in the Brazilian community in the Newark airport. And it's the same for us in Maine. We work with the 5 tribes in Maine. We live in Maine. And if you need a plumber, you call Sharon and say, Sharon, which one of your relatives is a plumber? And so you stick within the community if you possibly can. And so I think that probably mainstream North Americans are lacking community. That most people don't know their neighbors. They don't have a group of people that they hang out with. Maybe they go out with coworkers after work, maybe not. But in terms of sort of deep connections, we're lacking. North Americans used to get that through church. And church has fallen by the wayside, largely as a source of community. We have community through our Hochoka or Teoshpie. There are people that we regularly do ceremony with at our house, or we might go to someone else's house for ceremony. We have our Sundance Teoshpie, people that we go to that ceremony with, and we go to one in Western New York and one in South Dakota, and so we have that family, and we all look after each other. But I think it would be really lonely without those families, those Teoshpies. And I think many people lack that. We in the teaching that my wife Barbara and I do, we suggest to people that they create what we call hochokas. A hochoka has a couple meanings. One meaning is the circle of people who pray around a particular altar, and another meaning is a circle of people who gather together, for the purpose of prayer or ceremony. But we suggest that they invite everyone they know to come together for the purpose of being a source of healing for each other, and see who shows up and start from there. And there's all kinds of ways to proceed. We like talking circles, that being a plains procedure that seems to have gone global. I read a paper recently from a university in Australia, and they were calling it yarning circles. And they had a little asterisk, and they said, curiously, the Lakota people in North America seem to have developed this same concept, and they didn't even get it from us. So I thought, well, we're all equally anthropocentric. We all think we came up with every good idea and nobody else did. So, which reminds me of an elder I know who said, I was explaining quantum physics to him, and he said, well, isn't it grand that science is finally catching up to the Lakota? So, yeah, we need communities. And, when I sent you my list of questions, I was busily writing an essay. I had to write 10,000 words on indigenous criticisms of conventional mental health services for an encyclopedia called the Palgrave Encyclopedia for Critical Thought. And so I was deeply immersed in what do North American indigenous people not like about conventional mental health services. And I found out that it's the same in New Zealand and Australia, that they don't like the same things, which was kind of interesting. But so one of the important concepts that came out of that writing and reading and thinking is that in North America, there isn't a true self. There isn't a unitary self that you can find. That's more of a Hindu concept or a European concept. So what we have in North America are multiple selves. And the Lakota concept is the Nahi. And the Nahi is the swarm of all of the swarm of all of the beings and stories that are around you. And so you're some collection. Each of us is a collection of all of the stories that have influenced us, that have been told about us, that we've told, and with a spark of the beings, of each being who told that story. And the spark is called the Nakila. And so we are these beings who are who have stories and other sparks of other beings swarming around us with bodies to make it convenient to find us and to ground us on this earthly dimension. And so whomever I am appears in relationship to those to whom I relate. So I'm different in the different contexts that I find myself. So I'm a different self at Sundance, or I'm a different self at the Anipikaga ceremony. I'm a different self at work, at the hospital. I'm a different self at home with my wife. I'm a different self with my son or with my other children. And so the North American indigenous concept is that we recruit storytellers and stories to form a self, depending on the context in which we find ourselves. Sort of like how other countries form a government by you know, bringing together the different parties to form coalitions. And wish we could do that in the U.S. But so it's important because the idea is that we don't exist independently from our context. And so we have to be aware, continually aware of our connections with others, because we exist in the space between people. And that phrase, the Lakota phrase, Matakwiasin, it means that we're all related, you know, and that we exist in that space between people. We didn't think to turn off the hotel phone. It's got to be one of those timeshare marketers calling us.
Yeah.
It's like they called me before we got here, and I said, I don't want to buy a timeshare. Yeah, so don't call back, because that's not community. Anyway, yeah, so it's kind of important, as you were saying, in these times, because, you know, and as part of this work that I was doing for this essay that I wrote, I discovered there's such a thing as indigenous business management, which I had no idea. You know, and I found this a scholar named Micah, M-I-K-A, who wrote a book on indigenous business management that was published in 2019. And his idea is that if you're an indigenous businessman, then you must, whatever you do, you have to respect the environment and the people. That however you proceed in your work to make a profit, it cannot be at the expense of the environment or the people in whose context you're embedded. So it's a style of thinking that's completely opposite Milton Friedman, who wrote a famous book in 1982 who said that profit is it. That's all that matters. Not even ethics matters. You know, which is what Ford Motor Company applied in their thinking about the Ford Pinto, which not everyone remembers, but once upon a time there was a car made by Ford called the Pinto, and it had a problem with the gas tank. And Ford made the calculation that it would be cheaper to pay out wrongful death claims than to recall the Pinto and fix the gas tank. So Micah would say, Friedman would say, well, that's absolutely correct. And Micah would say, that's absolutely evil. Because you're killing people because it costs less to kill people than to fix the problem. And so, you know, my position is that we need indigenous wisdom to survive as a species. And that if we keep, you know, if we continue in the way that we're going under capitalism and individualism and sort of European liberal philosophy of essentialism and positivism, that we'll simply die. That we'll run out of water, food, and air. And I'm predicting the raccoons will take over because they're smaller and they can get by on less oxygen, and they've got opposable thumbs. So I have a friend who had a pet raccoon, and that raccoon could open the door to the refrigerator, take out a can of pop, and pull up the pop top, and sit down and drink it. So I'm banking on the raccoons if we all die. That was a long introduction.
No, I really appreciate that, and that was a funny note to end on. Yeah, and I'm totally in with you, can relate to that. And yeah, as the viewers and listeners watching this, y'all are probably realizing by now on the summit that it's not really interviews. This is like a fluid conversation, organic conversation. So yeah, that intro could have been the whole speech. Yeah, and Lewis, you touched base on a lot there and brought that perfectly. And kind of the difference between our views and European to what it really means to indigenous people now and always have been finding meaning in that. And one thing I wanted to touch base on is like you kind of hinted to it a little bit, like the word obligation and like what actually community really means to indigenous peoples compared to us nowadays. And so I think one of the questions that you and I were talking about was like, what are the ethical obligations that we have for each other if we are collective selves embedded in a community?
Right. And I think that we would have to look after each other. That we would realize that we should thank the people who are ill for being the canaries in our social coal mine and letting us know that the community is not well. And, there's an idea among a number of indigenous tribes in North America that if someone's sick, that you owe it to them to participate in helping them get well, because if they hadn't taken on the illness, it might have been you. That somebody had to take it on because it comes out of imbalance and disharmony. The word for imbalance in Lakota is Tawakalpta. And of course, the word for harmony is Wichozani. And so, if the community is out of balance, then somebody expresses that. Somebody takes on the sickness. And instead of avoiding them, lest we catch what they have, we probably need to help them. We probably need to reach out to them. And, and on the Diné Reservation in northern Arizona, when they put on these 11-day singing ceremonies, everyone is expected to contribute because of this idea that everyone is related. And if you're suffering, then I'm suffering too, because I'm connected to you. And if you're taking most of it on, it's my duty to support you to get better. And if that support means, preparing food for the ceremony, then I'll do that. If it means paying the drummers who might come from another community so they have gas money and food money and a little other resources, then maybe I'll do that. But everybody has to do something, and of course we see that at Sundance. When we come together to put on that ceremony, everyone contributes what they can contribute because we all have to help each other. And some people contribute their labor. And some people buy the propane. Some people go to Walmart and get the groceries, that being the closest place to get groceries in South Dakota. But, so if we're connected, then we have an obligation to be helpful to each other and to make sure that no one starves and no one suffers too much from poverty or whatever afflicts them.
Yeah. And I just love how this, especially at Coyote Institute, how you are bringing culture and community into contemporary healthcare. and like the work that it's doing. Um, and so we hear that from, like, if it's like from a European point of view, um, sometimes people will be like, well, that's like, wow, that's like groundbreaking. I'm like, oh, that's really progressive. And you're just bringing the same approach that's custom and indigenous, and it's just ancient wisdom, in your own unique way. And I just really love that.
Well,
And
and I think we probably need to acknowledge that the ancient Greeks had similar ideas, like
mhm,
Asclepius and the temple of healing that he created. And it's interesting too to think about. He was probably the first hypnotherapist or the first one to write about it. He had um, a like a basement, and people would be lying on um, mats on the floor, and underneath them, his helpers would be walking and talking to the people who were above them, giving them suggestions for healing. And when you think about it, there, it's an idea that almost every culture in the world has had, including Chinese and traditional Ayurvedic medicine, traditional Chinese medicine. Um, that idea of balance, that that we have to address the emotional, the spiritual, the physical, the communal, the relational, um, and that you can't just work in one dimension and expect to be healthy as a human body living in the world. Um, there was a movement, actually, in American medicine in the 70s, spearheaded by a guy named George Ingalls at the University of Rochester in New York, who came up with this amalgamated word, psychobiosocial spiritual. And he was arguing that all illness is simultaneously psychological, biological, sociological, and spiritual, and that one has to address all of those dimensions in order to help people get better. And I was training in psychiatry at the time, and I thought, wow, yeah, this is like what indigenous people think. This is great. And then it sort of disappeared. It went the way of the dinosaurs in contemporary medicine because the biological prevailed. And in the biological model, we don't need a relationship theoretically. I just diagnose you and I give you a pill and you get better. I mean, sadly, it doesn't work very well. And mostly people don't get better. But we pretend, well, I mean, we're like the ostriches that, we don't want to see what's really going on. But, and a lot of people have written about this. But I think whenever we look to people who have been doing a model of healing for more than 1,000 years, it always ends up looking pretty similar across cultures. Australia, New Zealand, North America, Africa, China, indigenous people around the world, because they had to survive, came up with models that worked. And it does work to address all of these dimensions. And, my criticism of my profession of medicine is that we fail to address all these dimensions. And consequently, we have a lot of people who are suffering, perhaps needlessly, who wouldn't suffer if we paid more attention to the non-biological dimensions that are equally important. And of course, there's more of them, so probably they're more important. And so that's, as you mentioned earlier, that's really been my project, the mission of Coyote Institute, which is to bring awareness to indigenous systems of healing and to say, look, guys, we need this. We need to practice more like this, and not just for Indians. We need to do it for everyone. And people will be healthier. And it's clearly an uphill battle because, relationship medicine is not as profitable as pharmacological medicine. It's more, I think, it fits the short-term versus long-term perspective. Like pharmacological medicine can seem like it's really effective in the short term, but it's not so good in the long term. Whereas relational medicine takes a lot longer, but seems to produce more profound effects. So we have to think longer in medicine. One of my friends in the UK said that general practice is ultra brief psychotherapy for an ultra long time. And so, and that makes more sense perhaps in the UK, where you get assigned to a practice based on where you live. And they're probably going to be your doctors for a really long time. And doctors don't move around as much in the UK. So you might end up with the same doctor for 40 years. It's a little different here because we shop. People get angry with one doctor and go find another, and they're not really assigned, to in the United States to one practice or another. But yeah, so and there's a guy in Nova Scotia who's brought this into the mainstream clearly in Canada, and it's happening to a lesser extent in the United States. His name is Albert Marshall, and he's a Mi'kmaq elder from the reserve near Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. And he calls it two-eyed seeing in English, or epto-optimunk in Mi'kmaq. And it's the idea that today we humans have to look at the world through both indigenous eyes and scientific and contemporary scientific eyes, and that both are true. That and if we cultivate more than one perspective, we'll do better than if we insist that there's a right answer and every other perspective is wrong. And that's really, the project of Western science has been this idea that there's a right answer, and by God, we're going to find it. We're going to find it through reductionistic research, and the level that we care most about is the smallest level, the level of molecules. So we're going to try to solve depression with molecules, instead of relationships. We're going to try to solve anxiety with drugs instead of learning how to accept our fears. So, so Albert came together with a biologist, and they created this integrative science program at Cape Breton University. And now two-eyed seeing is spreading like wildfire. It's just taking off in the nursing and the medical literature in Canada. It's less common to see in the US, but it's what we need to do. And Albert has a really cool example. In Maine, we have the largest tides in the world in the Bay of Fundy, which we share. The Bay of Fundy is shared with New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. And so Albert tells a story, there's a Mi'kmaq story that appeared about 3,400 years ago to explain the tides in the Bay of Fundy. And the story goes like this. There's a character in the Wabanaki world. Wabanaki is the people of the dawn, and it's the 5 tribes of the Northeast, the Penobscot, the 2 branches of Passamaquoddy, the Maliseet, and the Mi'kmaq. And so they occupy Maine, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. And the cultural hero of the Wabanaki is Glooskap. And Glooskap's kind of a big dude. He's got a truck stop named after him in Truro, Nova Scotia. So if you're ever driving through Truro on your way to Halifax from Maine, you'll see the Glooskap truck stop. And they've got a big statue of him there. But anyway, he was sort of the Finnish carpenter of creation. And because in their worldview, creators sort of threw the world together, but couldn't be bothered to work out the fine details. So Glooskap came down to kind of clean it up and do a little Finnish carpentry. And so Glooskap was kind of a big dude, and he asked Beaver to build him a dam across this particular inlet. And Beaver took, of course, you know how beavers, they take great pride in their engineering. And Beaver built the most amazing dam you could imagine across this inlet so that Glooskap would have a bathtub. And Glooskap was happily, bathing when a whale came by and said, "Hey, you guys, this is one of my favorite feeding grounds. You just took away one of my main sources of food. This is not okay." And Glooskap had to agree with whale and said, "No, you're right. We got to take down the dam." And Glooskap said to Beaver, "Hey, little dude, get in there and take down that dam." And Beaver said, "No way. I'm really proud of that dam. That's an engineering marvel of the world. I'm not going to take down that dam." So at that moment, whale got angry, and with one great giant slap of its tail, broke the dam. And the water surged in and surged out, and it's been coming and going like that ever since. So that's the Mi'kmaq version. So the university geology version is that about 3,400 years ago, there was a perfect storm. There was a confluence of a hurricane and a blizzard and the spring thaw runoff and a tornado and a bunch of other crazy things. And it caused this underwater bridge with these 2 underwater mountains to completely collapse. And that collapse of that underwater bridge opened up this inlet, and it created the tide surge that we have today. And so what Albert has said, well, they're both right. And they're both good descriptions of what happened. And it's perfectly fine to accept them both. So there's another word for that is explanatory pluralism. That it's okay to have a lot of explanations. And just like it's okay to have a bunch of selves. And, pick the one for the job at hand. If I'm at work, I need my work self. And I've been polishing it as best I can so that it doesn't annoy too many people. If I'm at home, I don't want my work self, and if we're, sometimes when we're dealing with people who are suffering, we need, the spiritual side. Sometimes we need the biological explanation, but they're all good explanations, and they can all help. And that's what I mean when I talk about, bringing the indigenous perspective into medicine and psychology. It's bringing 2-eyed seeing, explanatory pluralism, and understanding that we're faceted beings, and we have to be approached in a multifaceted way, which is the beauty of the four directions metaphor. So, the four directions, you can put all kinds of things in the four directions. But one version is, we have the spiritual healing in the east. We have emotional healing in the south. We have physical healing in the west. And we have social or community healing in the north. And we have to remember that if we want to be in balance, we can't neglect any of those areas. And it, it's a beautiful metaphor, I think, the metaphor of the horizon. So wherever I am, I'm in the center of the horizon. And I can turn 360 degrees and I can see all four directions. And that reminds me to stay in balance among all the parts of my life. I had a friend, and once upon a time I lived in Tucson, Arizona, and I had a friend there who thought, because he prayed a lot, that he could drink a case of Pepsi a day. And I said, dude, you're tempting the spirits. You're not in balance here. You can't ignore the physical just because you got the spiritual down. He said, no, I got this. And he got diabetes and died. So, you can't ignore any direction because something bad could happen if you do. But, in contemporary North American medical practice, we ignore the spiritual completely. And we ignore the social largely. Our idea of a social history is to ask someone if they smoke or drink, which when I was training in the 70s, we called that a habit history. The social history was, well, where do you live and who do you live with and what do you do all day and what makes you happy and what makes you sad and, what stresses you out and, who do you turn to for support? That was what we called a social history. And nowadays, you smoke, you drink, okay, got a social history. Because it turns out, and this is kind of sad in a way, I suppose, but in order to get paid the most by Medicare, you have to have social history, family history, all these elements to your write-up. But you only need 2 items in a social history. So if I ask you if you smoke or drink, that's enough. I'm going to get paid the most for Medicare, so I don't need to know any more about your life because it's not going to make me any more money. And that's a non-Indigenous perspective for sure that we'd like to change, because I want to know you. And that reminds me of a study that we presented at the European psychiatry meetings last year in Warsaw. We did. The study came about because too many of the doctors in training where I work were rolling their eyes at difficult patients. And I said, well, what if we knew their life stories? Maybe we would feel more kindly toward them. And so we set out to find difficult patients. We looked for people in pain because they're the most difficult, who are sad and worried, depression and anxiety, and chronic pain. And we did life story interviews and shared them with the doctors in training who were taking care of them. And we found out that the quality of the doctor-patient relationship, improved dramatically. But also that people's pain decreased. And think about that for a moment. You're a person in pain. You're coming to the doctor. Your doctor bothers to get your life story. And over the course of a year, their levels of pain go down. And they went down more than they go down with drugs. So knowing the patient's life story was an amazingly effective intervention for chronic pain. And the other interesting thing is the doctor's ratings on empathy went up, which is rare in training programs, because almost everywhere that it's been measured, doctors' ratings of empathy go down. For each year that they're in training, they're less empathetic than they were the year before. So it's all downhill after medical school. But so here we found, I was kidding one of our administrators. I said, you're always, buying these programs and paying for people to go to trainings to be more empathetic. And we came up with a way for people to become more empathetic that actually makes money, because you can charge for a life story interview. I said, imagine that. So, paying attention to the social makes a difference to the physical. And that's indigenous wisdom. Because from the strictly biological point of view, you shouldn't need to know the social to treat the physical. It shouldn't matter, but it does. It matters a lot. So that's a kind of indigenous wisdom that we're trying to bring into contemporary healthcare. And I should say, in the paper that I wrote, chapter I wrote for the encyclopedia, what indigenous people don't like about contemporary mental health services is that they don't include their community, that they operate from this individualistic model that says it's all in your brain. I don't need to know the people that you know. I don't need to know about your relationships and how they're going. I just need to look at your brain and give you a pill. And that should take care of it. And, to indigenous people, that's ridiculous. Like, that doesn't make sense. And why would you trust someone who thought that way? Because they're crazy to think that way. Which is why, conventional mental health services are not used by indigenous people. So, yes, but we've got a ways to go.
Yeah, but what a way that would change our communities. Like, and this is so powerful. Like that, like you're saying, that indigenous wisdom is brought in, and through that relationship, we're healing not just internally and like somatically, and through the body, but also through it's kind of amazing just in conversation. That doctor listening and just having that heartfelt conversation can mean so much. I'm just thinking about, I'm just thinking about myself just when you're saying that. I moved back to a place where I grew up just recently. I'm raising my kids there, and I went back to the doctor that I used to see when I was little, and that was amazing. And having these conversations, I wasn't really there was nothing in me that needed to be healed. It wasn't really anything tragic. It was tragic. It was just a checkup. But as you're saying that, like, this is it's so important. It sounds so simple at the same time. And as you said, we have a ways to go. And I liked how you tweaked that, and that kind of led into like another question, like just tweaking to that mindset can mean something pretty big for our community, especially in like the healthcare, and having that collective change can even change like some of these business practices.
Right. Because, sadly in the United States, healthcare is a business and it's set up to make money, and that isn't always in the patient's best interest. Mm-hmm. So, if we were working in the patient's best interest, we might not do many of the things that we do. There's some controversy for example, about statin drugs to lower cholesterol. So they're the most profitable drugs the world has ever known. And according to the guidelines, if you're a man over age 63, you should be on everyone should be taking a high intensity statin. But the guidelines are invented by cardiologists. And so the number, you have to give 100 people a statin in order to prevent one cardiovascular event, like a heart attack or a stroke. But of those 100 people, 2 will develop diabetes from the statin, and 10 will develop severe muscle problems, such that they can't exercise, and they're tired all the time. Because in essence, the statins interfere with your mitochondria. They work at the level of coenzyme Q10, which is kind of important for cellular metabolism. And there's even a slowly developing literature that that statins are associated with dementia, that taking statins will increase your risk for dementia. And the other interesting thing is that it turns out, and a colleague pointed this out to me and I verified it, is that so taking statin doesn't change your all-cause mortality. You have this, if you take a statin to lower your cholesterol, it might lower your cardiovascular mortality, but it doesn't change your overall mortality. And what that means is something is going up. It's increasing mortality in some other area that nobody wants to measure, because these are the most profitable drugs that mankind has ever known. And so, by God, we're not going to look for bad things on these drugs, because that would hurt profit. It could only hurt profit. Mm-hmm. So, if we were really concerned about, each other being as healthy as possible, we would pay attention to these things.
Yeah, and have healthier communities and families. And I guess this kind of comes back down to because we're kind of getting to the top of the hour here, and it kind of comes to the last question, which you're awesome at summarizing, so this would be perfect question. And that question is, like, you talked about survival as a species and how how the indigenous wisdom is seeing this contemporary clash with our society. And so the last question is, like, can we survive as a species under the individual self-concept thinking that we're definitely portraying right now in the United States?
I would say no. And there's a marvelous game called the Prisoner's Dilemma, and one can Google it. And in order to not lose the game, everyone has to cooperate. If one person tries to win on their own, everyone loses. And so it's a wonderful tool to teach the importance of cooperation and collaboration. And that's where we need to go. We all need to cooperate and collaborate if we want to survive as a species. And maybe the Earth is having second thoughts about us as a species. Like, maybe they weren't such a good idea. Maybe I prefer the dinosaurs. So we'll see. But yeah, I think if we want to have hope, we got to change to being more concerned about each other.
Yeah, definitely. And is there we still have actually about 5-10 minutes. Is there anything else you wanted to add on to that, or any other pieces you feel like we haven't touched base on yet?
Well, I would propose to people watching this that they do try to create a healing circle. That, it might be embarrassing at first, like to call up everyone you know and say, hey, I'm starting this regular meeting, you know, whether it's once a week or every other week or once a month or whatever it is. But to say, hey, I'm starting this meeting, this get together for people to be healing for each other, because we all need healing from time to time. And we all need a place where we can get healing without having to pay for it, because we can all pay for healing. But, if we have a healing circle where we don't have to pay anything, we just come because we care about each other, there's something really powerful about that. And so I propose to people watching that you do that, that you invite people and see who shows up. If it's 2 of you, well, find one more and you've got a circle, at least a triangle. And so what are you going to do? Well, you can always hold someone's head. If you don't know anything else, you can hold your head in their hands and try it. I mean, that is so amazingly wonderful to have someone hold your head in their hands. Or you can hold their feet. And if you're holding someone's feet, you'll find that you can't help but start to rub them. And reflexology. So you can always rub someone's feet. Find out about talking circles. There's a huge literature now. Just go to Google and type in talking circles, healing circles. If you go to Scholar Google and you type in healing circles and my last name, you'll get a study that we did on talking circles where we showed that they were more effective than going to the doctor for mental health problems. And so, that would be my advice to people, is to create community for yourself around being healing for each other. And inevitably someone will show up who knows Reiki, and Reiki's cool. Someone will show up who knows a little massage. That's nice. Someone will show up who knows how to do a little guided imagery. That's fun. People will come. And, maybe you'll stumble your way into a ceremony for each other. That's good. You'll find your way to doing ceremony. And when I was in Denmark, I was teaching a course in Denmark, and I said, all right, guys, we have to come up with a Danish ceremony that's uniquely Danish. And they came up with this idea of something that looked like communion, but using coffee. Sharing of the coffee was like the Danish version of like the ultimate ceremony. I'm like, whatever works for you guys, I'm good. I like coffee. So, but it gave them an opportunity to feel connected. And that's what we all need. Somebody asked the Dalai Lama once, they said, okay, so why do we need world peace? And he said, so we can have more friends. He said, we all need more friends.
I love that.
Yeah. So make more friends, have more friends, It's good to have people to talk to, because that's healing, and it keeps you out of trouble. I have friends, I get angry sometimes at work, and rather than dashing off an angry email or going up to someone and spouting off, I go look for my friends at work and I say, all right, I'm angry, and here's what I'm thinking of doing. And they're like, no, don't do that. I'm like, okay. I try to do that for the doctors in training too, keep us all out of trouble. So we need friends to help us regulate our behavior and emotions. That we can't do it on our own. Dogs help too. Dogs have been regulating human emotions for 143,000 years, and they've gotten quite good at it, I've observed. You know, all you have to do, if on the psychiatric unit, all you have to do if people are really agitated is to bring out the therapy dog. Everybody calms down. Because everybody wants the therapy dog to like them. And everybody wants to pet the therapy dog. So, and maybe humans are just overly complicated dogs, Things got crazy when we added that frontal lobe to the brain, and it's useful for building bridges, but maybe not for like managing our emotions. So so that's what I would say to people is get your healing circle going. Start your Hochoka. Create a space where it doesn't cost any money to feel that you have people who can be healing for you, be soothing, be nurturing, be emotionally regulating, be helpful to you, because we all need that. And I think it makes a difference to not always have to pay for it. That we need communities where, it doesn't cost anything to join. And when we do ceremony at home, we never charge because it's just not the way it's done, And I think churches had that idea too, right? That it doesn't cost to go to a church. At least I don't think it does. Maybe they get you coming and going at the collection plate, but it's voluntary. So, we just need to feel like people care about us, and it can't all be handled by paid professionals. That we need some friends too.
Yeah, that's powerful. And like you said, you don't have to be a healer. Like that frontal lobe, we want to label things and find meaning. And that word healer, like somebody thinks like they have to be. It's all up to them. It goes back to that self concept that, like you said, when we have friends that will do the healing just by listening, and
right.
Just that deep listening. To me, a true friend is somebody who just listens without judgment or criticism, and they might not even have to say anything that could be healing for you in your healing circle. We hold counsel a lot at Nature Link, and this person was going through this huge process, and no one knows the answer to her healing, but just having a circle listen to her for about 45, I think it was like about an hour, actually 45 minutes, an hour, and no one say anything, and then we open the circle up, and no one says anything, and then we leave. And that was like, for her, that was all she needed.
Fabulous.
So
Yeah.
like these circles,
Mm-hmm.
Even if you don't have the answer, you don't need to have the answer. That's
right. That's what I find. I mean, in the sort of contemporary urban North American world, people tend to look for the wizard, the magical wizard to heal them. And really what they need for the most part are just friends to listen to them. And people call me up and they say, "Are you a shaman?" And I say, "No." And they're like, "Oh, I need a shaman." I'm like, "Well, they live in Russia, because it's a word from Siberia that means healer." But, it was like when there was a joke that I used to play when I practiced in New York City, because in New York City, people are always looking for the best doctor. So they would come in and they'd say, "I'm looking for the best doctor. Are you the best doctor?" And I would say, "No, I'm just an average doctor. I'm looking for the best patients." And either they laughed and stayed with me, in which case it was good, or they said, "Well, no, I want the best doctor." And then I would send them down to the hall to some guy who charged $750 for the first office visit. And, and that was in like the 1999. You can imagine he must be charging $1,500 now. Yeah. So I think that maybe that's a message that people need to hear, is that the indigenous North American perspective is, that people who are helpful with healing see themselves as hollow bones through which the forces work. The spirits, nature, they see themselves as providing a safe space for the medicine. But they don't see themselves as all-powerful wizards, and if I've noticed when people go onto the reservations looking for the all-powerful wizard, everyone plays dumb. Everyone scatters. So like, we don't know anyone like that, because it's just so anti-cultural, to imagine that there's some powerful guy who's going to make you well. And but it's so hard for people to realize sometimes that it's not as complicated as you think. You just need friends to listen to you and care about you and talk to you. And yeah, maybe you need a little exercise and to stop eating all that cake. There's that. But it's not always as complicated as people think. And I don't know, I think, my own personal belief is that the spirits will help us more likely if we're doing everything we can in community to help each other and to help ourselves, as opposed to just, going to some spot and demanding that they fix me. Probably they're like, dude, I don't want to fix you. You didn't do the work. Go do some work and call us back when you're further along. But that's sort of the indigenous way of thinking. But it's so not like urban North America where people are looking for like the magical cure.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a good advice and a good takeaway for our listeners today, because I don't want to go too far over for everybody. But yeah, just that deep friendship, love, and community. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
But I really want to thank you with your words of wisdom, Lewis, and what you talked about today. That really means a lot to me. But also I'm hoping for our listeners and also our viewers that they took something away today. But did want to allow you a moment to talk about your free gift description. And instead of me talking about it, you know more about that than I do, because you're the one offering it. And
yeah. Well, so there's some options, and the primary offering is to join one of the online classes that we're teaching on a regular basis, or to come to one of the Coyote Institute events. But if people don't want to do that or can't do that, then we'll send a guided imagery, either electronically or burned on a CD. And that's all laid out on the webpage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. And yeah, if you're somebody hearing this or watching this, you can go to the summit page, and that free gift and all that will be next to Lewis's name and picture. But yeah, I feel like if I kept asking questions, we'll go down all these other rabbit holes.
Right.
So you and I can talk all day.
We could talk all day, indeed.
But I really, really appreciate this, and thank you so much for coming on today. And I just hope that you, not just yourself, but the people coming away from this will start really building that community and think of that word as healing as not just you're the healer, your whole community needs to be backing you in the process. So
right.
I love that wisdom that you brought today. So thank you so much, Lewis.
All right. Thank you.
And have fun in New York.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, safe travels and thank you.